that we have the kind of discussion that is honest, that is open, that sheds light on the subject. And no one can do that better than my colleague from the great state of Maryland, Donna Edwards.
Thank you for yielding, Mr. Yarmuth. You know, as I listened to this discussion, I thought, I wonder what taxpayers are thinking about this discussion. I wonder about those taxpayers who go to work every day, but through no fault of their own, they can't afford to buy health insurance, even though they work every day and they pay taxes every day. And I thought, well, under the Affordable Care Act, indeed, those people, we get to, you know, put a little bottom up under them so that they can be covered, so that they can, you know, go to work, take care of their families, but also have the security in knowing that their families are going to be covered with health care. I thought about the discussion earlier on this floor where our colleagues on the other side of the aisle talk, you know, somewhat disparagingly at the young person who maybe finishes college or trade school and goes to get a job, but there's a gap in health care coverage because they've turned 22, 23 years old. They are working for a living, doing what they need to do. They've gone to school, they've gotten a trade maybe, and they can't afford health care coverage. And so their parents get to say, you know what, for all of our peace of mind and for your security, we're going to, you know, pay for that health care coverage under our plan. And so, you know, Mr. Speaker, as I stand here today, I think about my son who's just gotten a job, and there was this period, I remember when I received that notice from our health insurance company, and that notice, you know, it was a shocker to me because it basically said, you're done. And had we not had this provision in the Affordable Care Act that enables parents like me and other parents around the country to have the peace of mind of being able to keep our children, our young people, our young working people on our health care plan, I don't know what working families would do out there. Mr. Speaker, I thought also about a conversation that I'm going to share with you with some seniors that I had with friends as I was spending New Year's Eve. And one of the seniors said to me, we were talking about health care, and they said, you know, I have a medical condition and I'm spending thousands of dollars and I've fallen into the donut hole, and it is really taking a chunk out of our pocket. And I had the privilege on December 31st of saying to this family, do you know that as of January 1st, as of the next day in 2011, your prescription drug that's fallen into that donut hole will actually receive a 50% discount for that prescription drug. They had no idea. I was glad to be able to share it with them. They're not my constituents. They live in somebody else's state. But it was great to be able to share that with them, and that's the experience that many of our seniors all across the country are having right now as they realize that they won't have to bear the burden of out-of-pocket costs for prescription drugs that fall through a donut hole because they can't afford it anymore. Their young people be able to be covered until they're 26. If you experience domestic violence in a handful of states, that's a pre-existing condition. Guess what? The insurance companies will no longer, as we move into the implementation of our health care reform bill, be able to call that a pre-existing condition. And so I'll close and allow you some additional opportunity in your time, but I do want to say that it was really compelling to read the Constitution here on the floor of the House of Representatives today. And again, a very important reminder of our obligation as elected officials to look out for the general welfare of the people. And I can think of no better way to do that than making sure that we protect the health insurance, the health care that Americans have been guaranteed because of what we were able to accomplish with the Affordable Care Act.
I thank the distinguished Congresswoman from Maryland for her comments, and I'm actually kind of glad that Congressman King brought up these major benefits which are now helping families across this country. Ms. Edwards talked about the benefit of adding your son or daughter under 26 to your policy, and Mr. King basically poo-pooed that. I don't know if that's exactly a good legislative term, but kind of ridiculed that. And then he talked about lifetime limits and how lifetime limits were not necessarily something that we should worry about, in spite of the fact that almost 1 million Americans a year, historically, over the last few years, have gone bankrupt because they either had no insurance or their insurance was inadequate and they lost everything they had because of health care costs, because of a cancer diagnosis or a serious accident. These are real-life stories. These are not abstractions. And I understand that we have many colleagues on the other side of the aisle who believe in, with almost a religious zeal, in certain things like the perfection of the marketplace, in spite of the fact that we've seen time after time after time in this country, not too long ago with the financial system, how our markets often fail, how we have created or allowed to be created enormous sources of power and concentrations of economic power in this country that have basically distorted the marketplaces. And that is true, very, very true, in the area of health insurance. We have many, many states in which one company, one insurer will dominate the insurance market. 85, 90% of the insurance in that state sold through one insurance company. That is not something that the drafters of the Constitution envisioned. So it's nice to believe in free market principles, and I think Democrats believe in free market principles as well as Republicans do. But the fact is, in real life, not in a history philosophy book or a political science philosophy book, in real life, markets fail, markets get distorted, and that is when the government is responsible for protecting the general welfare of the population, as the Constitution says. Now, I want to return, because we've been joined by another colleague, I want to return to this issue of rules, because, again, the budgetary rules that the Republicans have set up to govern this next Congress are creating some incredibly difficult situations for our states, our localities, and our people. And one of those areas in which this has been particularly true, and I know I've been contacted by transportation officials in Kentucky about how desperate they think, how dangerous they think these new rules may be. And Joe Courtney from Connecticut has joined us to talk about that implication of the new rules that we are going to be operating under. So I yield to the gentleman from Connecticut.
Thank you, Mr. Yarmuth, and I appreciate the fact that you're putting the spotlight on this issue, which is really extraordinary in terms of what's just happened in the last 24 hours. As you know, and as Congresswoman Edwards knows, the real workhorse of infrastructure, transportation funding in this country is the Highway Trust Fund. That is a mechanism which is set up by the Congress. It has a dedicated revenue source, gas taxes. And since 1998, there has been a rule which the Congress has operated under which says that the 5-year transportation plan authorized by the Congress cannot be tampered with by a bill that's brought to the floor of the House. If it is, then that bill is ruled out of order. And the purpose of that is to make sure that the transportation plan, which is done in a 5-year increment, has sanctity, has consistency, so that state DOTs like yours in Kentucky or Maryland or Connecticut can actually move forward on multi-year projects, which of course most road construction, bridge construction falls into that timeline. Well, you know, this has been the operating rules of the House since 1998. Yesterday, the Republican rule, which was adopted, astonishingly rescinded that protection in terms of procedure for the Transportation Trust Fund, again, the mechanism which ensures that states get appropriate funding for highways. So a coalition grew up over the last 3 days, including Labor's International Union, Iron Workers, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, the American Trucking Association, the Motorcycle Riders of America, people who actually care about making sure that our roads and bridges have the adequate support to make sure that, again, as a growing country, we are going to be able to move people and goods from one place to the other in a appropriate fashion. By the way, our competitors around the world are moving past us at Mach speed in terms of their transportation infrastructure investment. Nonetheless, this coalition warned the new majority that this new rule was going to upset, again, the consistency which transportation funding requires. The new majority went ahead with that rule, adopted it, claimed that they, in fact, were not doing that to the Transportation Trust Fund. But interestingly, the markets say otherwise. UBS Paine-Webber issued a downgrade to transportation construction companies on the Wall Street stock markets and stock exchanges, and their stocks declined yesterday in the wake of the adoption of this rule. And again, I earlier today submitted press accounts that describe, in fact, the sequence of what actually happened. We are talking here about a sector of the U.S. economy that's not in a recession, it's in a depression. The construction trades right now are looking at unemployment rates of 25%. Rather than shrinking and inhibiting the transportation infrastructure of this country, we should be investing in it. And let's be very clear here. There is not going to be any private investment that's going to fill the gap that's being created by undercutting the sanctity of the Highway Trust Fund. The fact of the matter is this is done through public dollars, and every generation, going back to really Jefferson, has understood that this is essential to have an economy that can actually thrive and grow. And as I said, we have now left the highway funding of this country subject to the whims of the annual appropriations process. That is not the type of horizon which planning can actually take place at state DOTs. And it doesn't surprise me that the folks in Kentucky have contacted the people at DOT, in Connecticut have certainly done the same, and all across the country, again, management, labor, public sector groups that care about highways, they are just incredulous, particularly at this time with the weakness of this economy, that this House has adopted that type of rule.
I thank the gentleman, and reclaiming my time, the analogy I used earlier was with families, and we all know we're in a difficult budgetary situation. We know we're running huge deficits right now, and we know that the money that we are spending, a large portion of it we are borrowing because tax revenues can't support it. This Republican majority now has basically taken the position that they're going to strangle this government and put a cap on expenditures, and that certainly is, I understand that that's part of their honestly held philosophy. But if you're a family and you've got 2 kids, high school age, and one of you have two income earners, one of them loses their job, are you going to then say, under no circumstances am I going to borrow money to help pay for the college education of my 2 teenagers so they can have a better life and they can be prepared to meet the demands of the future? I'm just going to keep cutting expenses. And that analogy seems to be working here, particularly with regard to transportation as well,
Absolutely.
The investment that we have to make.
No, and that's right. If families make that decision to make capital investments along exactly the same lines, whether it's to fix a roof, put a new driveway in, buy a house, again, that's done through financing, debt financing, and it's again, the way that particularly the middle class kind of deals with those challenges. But there's no question that in terms of our own country's history going back in time, again, even to the beginning of our government, even during the Civil War, when the finances of this country was completely going from almost day to day, Abraham Lincoln did not pull back in terms of the need for us to invest in rail, land-grant colleges. Again, I mean, this was in the middle of the worst conflict in the history of this country, but yet he still saw the need for us as a nation to still continue to invest in the future and with borrowed funds. Because those types of investments, investing in people through education or investing in infrastructure, comes back to benefit the economy long-term, and the multiplier effect is much higher than the actual price tag of those initial investments.
I thank the gentleman, and again, I go back to these rules that have been adopted now in the House, And they basically give extraordinary, unprecedented power to one person to set these budget limits, to decide the budgetary impact of an investment in infrastructure or a health care law, or the repeal of a health care law, or, for instance, the repeal of many of the advances we made in terms of education funding during the 111th Congress. And it seems to me that, as I read through the Constitution, the Founding Fathers probably didn't anticipate that we would basically disenfranchise 434 members of Congress in making these incredibly important decisions about how we raise revenue, which is specifically a power that has been given for initiation to the House of Representatives, or to spend tax revenue, that kind of power would vest in one person, and that you would set up a set of rules that set up two sets of books and say, if you drop revenue, if you cut taxes, if you have a loss of revenue, that has no budget implications, but everything you spend has to be offset somewhere along the line. And I think in terms of not just investment in infrastructure, but also investment in research, medical research, which probably is the real answer to our long-term health care financing costs. If we can control or cure diabetes and cancer and make an impact on heart disease, these are the things that really are going to help us in the future. But to set up these kind of rules, which basically, again, disenfranchise not just 434 members of Congress, but in the process, virtually every American citizen from the process of deciding what money should be spent and invested in some very, very important aspects of the general welfare. And I'd like to yield again to Donna Edwards from Maryland.
I thank the gentleman for yielding, and it occurred to me as we heard this discussion, and thank you to Mr. Courtney for raising these issues with us, Mr. Speaker, because it occurred to me that while we should be spending our time focused on job creation, and we know that a core for job creation for the 21st century for this country is in our investment in our transportation infrastructure, really putting people back to work. And instead, we are relitigating what the American people thought we had finished with health care. And so here we are with a rule that then says to us, even as the bipartisan commission on a debt commission has said that we need to invest in the nation's infrastructure. Those are investments that create jobs, jobs where taxpayers are paying into the system so that we have revenue, so that we can invest in our infrastructure, that we're going to be constrained from doing it. And I'm reminded that in the last Congress, in the 111th Congress, every member, I believe, of our Transportation and Infrastructure Committee wrote to the President of the United States saying, we need to do a long-term transportation infrastructure bill so that our states can begin to really put people back to work. And here we are in the 112th Congress, led by the Republicans, who have put forth a rules package that will constrain our ability to create jobs in this country. And with that, thank you, Mr. Yarmuth, and I yield.
Thank you for that contribution. And we've also been joined by Congressman Cohen from Tennessee, and I'd like to yield time to him.
Thank you, Mr. Yarmuth. Indeed, the issues that Mr. Courtney brought forward in his 1 minute today were alarming to me, because my hometown of Memphis depends on transportation. That's what makes it America's distribution center, the roads, the rivers, the runways, and the rails. And if we don't have monies to go into helping our airports, where Federal Express is located in my district, in your district, Mr. Yarmuth, UPS, it's so important because that's how we move the products, move products all over the world from those hubs and move commerce. And that's why it's so important that we have an FAA Reauthorization Act passed, which a lot of which will be expenses to modernize the structure, and the transportation bills that Mr. Oberstar, who was one of the great members of this House, no longer a member, tried to get passed last year to both stimulate the economy in the short run and in the long run, as Mr. Courtney said, with that multiplier effect by creating jobs. It's roads that take goods to market, that move commerce, that move raw materials. And I was hoping and do hope that we'll have bipartisan efforts to have transportation FAA reauthorization bills passed that will move this economy forward. The economy is still in a difficult spot, and we can't really see that the economy improving if we continue to cut spending, particularly in places such as transportation infrastructure and the airport infrastructures. That's so important. And so it was distressing news to see this happen. It is difficult to see where we can get us out of this near depression that was caused by the Bush administration with cutting spending. I know Paul Krugman has people that don't think he's correct all the time. I happen to think he's correct most of the time, and the Nobel Prize people aren't always correct. But when they gave him the Nobel Prize for economics, some of the brighter people in the world thought he was pretty good on economics. And it's his belief that we need to do more spending, and I concur with him. And I'd hate to see us leave this economy that's about to get out of the ditch, put it back in the ditch by cutting spending that's so important, particularly in infrastructure. And I thank you for the opportunity to comment on this.
I thank you for that. And as we wind down, pursuing this analogy with families and also with small businesses, I mean, people legitimately borrow money, and businesses legitimately borrow money for two reasons. One is for survival, to eat, to pay salaries if you're a small business, and they borrow money for investments. And we have plenty of investments that we can make in this country that are desperately needed, infrastructure being one, education being another, medical research being a third category. And we've basically been told by the Republicans that there is no basis, no justification for spending any more money, and because we're in a deficit situation, borrowing any more money, except when it comes to giving tax breaks for very, very wealthy Americans, millionaires, billionaires, hedge fund managers, and the like. And that's okay, and we can do that, and we can balloon the budget, the deficit, the national debt, to do that. But we can't do it to help people, to provide people's health care, to invest in needed infrastructure, to invest in the things that will make this American economy the kind of economy that we will all be proud of, that will work for everyone, that will truly live up to the ambitions of the Founding Fathers when they wrote the Constitution that we read today, to create a more perfect union. That's what we're all about, and we'll continue as Democrats and now as members of the loyal opposition in this body anyway, to fight for the kind of balanced and intelligent investment and restraint of spending that will get us to the world that we all envision. So I thank my colleagues for joining me today, and with that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. Members are reminded not to traffic the well while another member has the floor. Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 5, 2001, the Chair recognizes the gentleman from New Mexico, Mr. Pierce, for 30 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate the opportunity to address the House on this historic day when we have had the entire body read the Constitution of the United States. As that process went on, there was some wonderment in the audience about why we were doing it and what it would mean. But as I listened to the different members, bipartisan, reading the Constitution, I felt a gravity come through the institution that we began to listen to and hear and read the words of our Founding Fathers as they set us on this great experiment called the American Republic. The Republic which was turned loose for the first time, a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. And on this historic day, we have to contemplate what our tasks are as they lie ahead. For myself, I see the most important thing that in front of us as being economic growth, jobs, and we have to wonder what we're going to do about that. As I traveled around the district after the election, we have 18 counties, and we did 18 different town hall meetings listening to the people of the district after the election, and the overriding concern is what are we going to do about jobs and what are we going to do about the economic future of the country. I think people are alarmed at the policies that they have seen come out of Washington. They're alarmed at the spending. They're angry that Washington has not been listening, and they're just upset with the policies in general. The last election sent two very clear messages. Number one, you in Washington are not listening to us. Number two is that we don't like what you've been doing. So as we contemplate the future, we have to try to get our hands around the economic growth question. And we have to ask ourselves, why do we not have job creation at this time in our history? The most important thing, as a business owner, I can tell you that the most important thing that we face right now is uncertainty. Now, that uncertainty originates from inside the government, so our government is doing the things which freeze our job creation in its place. The uncertainty arises on two basic fronts. First of all, taxation, and second, regulation. And so our friends across the aisle were just asking, why are we talking about the health care bill when that's been debated and discussed? If we narrow it down to job creation, if we narrow it down to the economic uncertainty or certainty, I hear business owners every day saying, we're going to have to lay off 1 or 2 people, maybe up to 10% of our workforce. Maybe we're going to have to lay off more to get below that threshold because we cannot afford the mandates that are given to us in this health care bill. So number one, that's taxation and uncertainty all in one piece. The health care bill hires 16,000 IRS agents but does not hire 1 doctor. You can always tell by the functionality, not by the name of a bill what it does, but by the functionality. And when it hires 16,000 IRS agents and no doctors, you can guess that it's more about taxing the American public than it is about providing health care. And we're seeing that play out in the job market across the United States. People are frozen into place wondering what it's going to mean in additional cost for their companies. So rather than leaving those people on the payroll, they're actually shrinking the payroll at a time when we need employment. 9.5% to 10% unemployment for extended periods of time is not what makes people secure about the future. So that's one piece of the health care bill. The second piece of the health care bill that is freezing job growth and job creation in its tracks is the regulatory environment. This is a time with baby boomers moving into retirement age. Retirement age brings more expenses, more health care costs, and we should be seeing a growth in jobs in the health care industry nationwide, but instead that industry is frozen regulatorily. People don't know what the future is going to bring, and so that job growth that should be occurring to take care of our seniors is actually frozen in place by the regulations in this bill. So again, if we begin with the idea that we want to create jobs and grow the economy, we have to assess those things, those elements which are creating the impediments to growth, taxes and regulation, and we can walk through our economy one section at a time to find the same thing is occurring, and we would begin to understand more clearly and more definitely that our government is the problem in job creation. For instance, if we take a look offshore, we all saw the problems with BP. That was on the TV every day. And I think BP should be 100% accountable and responsible. It was my business. My wife and I had a small service company. We fixed and repaired downhole problems in oil wells. So we're familiar with the things that, the decisions that were being made by the company out there as that well progressed towards a catastrophic failure. Now, I do not believe, even though I think BP should be accountable, I do not believe that we should have killed 1 job in relation to that. When an airliner crashes, we don't stop all airlines. We bring the nation's best people together, we determine what happened, and we determine how to make it not happen again. That's what we should be doing offshore. We should be bringing the nation's best together, letting them analyze the problem, and then making sure it does not occur again. But instead, the Obama administration implemented a moratorium, and that moratorium shut down the drilling offshore. We have 33 deep-water platforms. Those deep-water platforms cost billions to make, sometimes 15 years to manufacture them, and we have now shut them down. No economic activity at all. Now, any business will tell you that they've got to have revenue from their investment, and so now then those deep-water rigs are beginning to steam away at about 2 or 3 knots per hour to foreign countries. Some have already gone to Africa, South America. Those jobs will never occur offshore in the U.S. again. I think that that's an over-response from the Obama administration, and I believe that one of the things this Congress should do is find the pendulum, pull the pendulum back to the middle. Yes, we should protect our environment. Yes, we should hold the companies accountable, but no, we should not have killed 1 job. So I think in the early days of this Congress, that we should make that a clear differentiation between the parties or between philosophical views of how to run the country. I think that we should make those clear distinctions that this group of people should be back on the payroll. And yes, we should keep our environment clean, and we will hold those who make problems accountable. And I think the American people are looking for that balance, that pendulum to come back toward the middle to where we say we can protect, we can preserve, and we can create jobs simultaneously. And that is one of my sincere hopes, that we begin to do this in these early days. There's an economic truism that says when you raise taxes, you kill jobs. When you lower taxes, you create jobs. People would say, well, how do we create more jobs? The answer is, if you really want to do it, you should lower taxes. And that's what this bill right at the end of the lame duck session to extend the Bush tax cuts. It was saying that we should not raise taxes on any single of Americans. Now you have the partisan debate that says we shouldn't be lowering taxes on billionaires. Well, frankly, there are very few of those. Many of the people who fall in that $250,000 a year and above income are simply small business people. For instance, just last week, we had a dairy owner saying, you know, we run $1 million a month through my small dairy. We only have 50 or 60 employees, but it costs us $1 million a month to milk cows, to pay the feed, and hopefully we get enough revenue. And yet these are people that you're going to drive their taxes up on. As you drive taxes up on your job creators, what you do is you take away their ability to create more jobs. Now, if any of you have any cash left in the bank, which is questionable at this point, you would know that cash in the bank has almost zero worth. You get 0.0025. You get 1/4 of 1% interest on your money in the bank. So any company today is looking to reinvest its money to create cash flow rather than holding cash in the bank. But the uncertainty, the tax uncertainty, and the regulatory uncertainty cause us to be uncertain about the future, and it causes us not to create jobs. And so we in this body have a tremendous obligation and a tremendous responsibility, and even we can create the right perception, the right certainty, if we'll simply take the right steps to just cause the mental framework of America to say, yes, we now know where we're going in the future. We now can invest with a certain amount of predictability. And I think that it is our God-given responsibility at this point in our history to do everything we can to start rebuilding our economy. So there are those who would say, but we can't do that. We might take jobs back from some foreign country. The entire world's economy takes its heartbeat from the U.S. economy. We're about 25% of the world's economy. I was in Germany several years ago to visit the soldiers in Landstuhl who had been wounded. In the evening time, we met with about 100 different German corporations, and they said, please fix your economy. When you, the U.S., sneeze economically, we, the world, catch flu economically. And so that gives you some understanding of our responsibility to fix our economy. And so systematically, I think that we should walk through each industry one at a time to see what this government has been doing to kill or freeze jobs. I think that once we look offshore and realize that we are killing those jobs, we're sending those jobs to, say, Venezuela. I'm not sure who among us would want to do that, but that's in effect what is happening. I think that we should do what it takes to bring those jobs back. I think then systematically as we work our way through the country, we should ask ourselves about the 27,000 farmers in the San Joaquin Valley. 27,000 farmers that used to make their way, make their payments to the bank, make payroll, buy fertilizer, buy seeds, buy new tractors, invest in diesel, invest in repairs of their tractors. That's a whole growing economy, but a couple of years ago, because of a 2-inch silvery minnow, that entire economic region was simply shut down. That is, we're choosing all on behalf of a species preservation and none on behalf of the human species job creation. I think that the American people are expecting us to find the balance. I think they're expecting us to keep the species alive, maybe in holding ponds, and release them by the millions into the river. But I think they're expecting us to find a solution to the job creation in this country, and I think that we can do it better than by simply saying, by some judge's order, that that entire economic subculture is simply going to disappear. Now the farmers haven't been working in a couple of years. Many are on assistance. They are not making their payments for the land. The banking system is less stable in the region. And in the process, we're importing food which is far less safe to consume. We're importing from Central America, South America, maybe Mexico, and we have no control over what pesticides they use. And so we've been seeing increasing inputs of food into our economic system here in the U.S., which are less safe. We saw the lead poisoning from China. We see these things every day. Why we would do that on behalf of some rigid philosophical viewpoint is simply exasperating Americans at this point. Another issue in which we should look, if we're systematically looking at the way our economy is being frozen in its tracks, is our entire timber industry. We used to have a thriving timber industry here in this country. In New Mexico, we had a thriving timber industry that was almost as big as the oil and gas industry. We employed 20,000 people in the timber industry at one point. Today, New Mexico, like many of the other states, employs 0. We have nobody working in the timber industry. Now, in full disclosure, during the last campaign, I did have a guy come up and say that's incorrect. We have 8. He said, I started a small lumber mill, and we're processing small diameter trees, and he had said we hired 8 people. But imagine what would be going on in New Mexico if we had our communities with those timber jobs that used to be there. Our tax base would increase. The number of jobs would increase. We would have people paying federal income tax, state income tax, but instead those economic potentials have been shifted away to another country. Now, I love the Canadians, but I think that we should have the jobs in New Mexico that we ship to Canada. The idea when we put the spotted owl regulations into effect was that we're going to send these jobs to third world countries. That's not what happened. They went to the economically closest neighbor, the one with the least transportation costs, and we gave the jobs to them. I think that in this country, people are tired of our government choking down the job base, the economic base for different regions. And we can work our way across the country and assess these. I think the American people are expecting us in this new Congress, as we go through the Constitution, as we read it on the floor, I think they're expecting us to redesign and reinvent government. I think they're expecting us to take a fresh look, do a forensic audit of the entire government to see what's working properly and what is working improperly. And when we do that, I think they expect us to cause efficiencies to occur in the government and cause efficiencies in the regulatory framework to where we can protect the species, protect the environment, protect the worker, and have the job creation on the other side of the pendulum. Find that spot in the middle where we can do both. I think Americans are alarmed. I think that they're afraid. And I think that they're angry over the way that Washington has been functioning. The last election said so. I do not think the last election was about Republican politics. I think it was a message that we want things to straighten up in America. If we're going to straighten things up in America, the most important thing to do is set about job creation and economic growth. If we will grow the economy about 3 to 3.5%, and that's what we've averaged for the last 70 years, so understand that that's not an unachievable goal. But if we will grow our economy in that range, then all the problems begin to dissipate. The shortages in budgets in the federal government begin to dissipate. The shortages in our state budgets begins to dissipate. That is the only answer. I've never seen a company save its way to prosperity. So I agree with our leaders and I agree with the Republican Party that we should be looking at spending cuts throughout our government. We should be finding more efficient, effective ways to have governance. But I do not think we can find our way to prosperity in simply the budget cuts, but instead we have to look at tax certainty and regulatory certainty to create the economic growth that is there. Now, I said earlier that tax cuts create jobs. And you might want to know how that actually plays out. One guy in Artesia, New Mexico, Mr. Sweat, said it most clearly. He said, for me to create one job, he said, I'd drive bulldozers. He said, for me to create one job takes $340,000. Now, he said, if the government is taxing away my profits, then it takes longer to accumulate the $340,000. He said, as I mentioned earlier, that money in the bank is absolutely no use right now, that I would rather have it in the bulldozers, but the government takes it and taxes it away, then it takes me longer to create a job. And so you see this stagnant economy, one job at a time, because we're taxing too high, we're spending too frivolously as a government, and the American people are looking for solutions. And I think that we as Republicans have the right idea in tax certainty, regulatory certainty, and the job creation will begin then from the private companies. Now, people have asked, what about the stimulus bill? Well, the stimulus bill was never going to create jobs, because what it does is it taxes away from that bulldozer operator who was going to create the job with his $340,000, and then it gives that tax money over here to someone else. And they create jobs, but just for a short time, because if they only created jobs with that input of stimulus money, then that's not a legitimate long-term job in the first place. What we are looking for is sustained economic growth from jobs that come by private companies investing private capital. This is a capitalist society. Capital is the building block. As we take away that capital, and those are capital is generated by profits, as we tax away the capital, then we convert ourselves into a stagnant, non-growing economy. It's all fairly basic, but it just gets unbasic. It gets confusing when we here in Washington want to take the money from our job creators and spend it ourselves. There is something in politicians that seems to thrive on taking your money and putting it here to create our idea of right and wrong. Let the American people free. Let the American people have their tax money back, and they will begin to invest it in growth opportunities. How many of us are involved in the stock market? We do not want to invest our stock market in uncertain stocks or uncertain bonds. So the idea of certainty plays out all the way through the investment spectrum, from just your basic small guy buying into the stock market to your small business person who wants to invest in a piece of equipment, a pickup truck, a new room in his office, a new office for someone to provide some service at, a new computer so he can bring on a new IT person. Those are all examples of private investment, private capital creating jobs in the private market. Now, people say always, well, what about those jobs? If we raise taxes, we can create more jobs over here in, say, teaching in our schools, or maybe hire more government agents over here in the Department of Transportation or wherever. Again, the basis of any economy cannot begin at government spending. It has to begin in the private market. When we in the public sector, when we in government take more than generally somewhere in the range of 20 to 22 or 23%, what we do is we stifle growth of the economy. You can look at the full state-run economies. USSR was a good example. They were above 50, 60%. Their government took in that much of the gross domestic product. They eventually collapsed because there was no growth in jobs, no growth in revenue, and then we had a simple failure of the economic system. Now, as we convert from more a private market into a government market, we're going to see the increased pressures of stagnant economies because, again, we're taxing away that ability for private firms to invest private capital. We can never take money from private companies, put it into the government, and have the government to run companies. I give an example that if the government thinks it can run a company, let's let it fix the post office first. That's a business operation that it's in, and I don't, maybe you think the post office is running well, but many would disagree that it does. Another example of why government shouldn't be in business is Medicare, Medicaid. Now, we've been told here in this body that Medicare loses about 20% to fraud every year. That's about $90 billion. Another $60 billion a year on Medicaid fraud. That's just fraud. That's not waste. That's people cheating the system. The example was given by 60 Minutes a couple of years ago by a guy in Florida who's making $400,000 a month selling things he didn't really own to clients of the Medicare system. Now, they did exist and they had numbers. And so he had a storefront because he said the government inspectors would drive by and they had to drive by to see that I actually was there and had a storefront, but he said I never owned any inventory. So never had any inventory, selling fictitious things to real Medicare patients. He made $400,000 a month. He said on this TV interview, yeah, you caught me and I'm going to jail for 12 years. But he said there are 2,000 people just like me here in Miami. He said while I'm in jail, I'm going to lease my list, my mailing list of Medicare patients, to someone else who's going to do the same thing. Now, if a business were to do that, they would be out of business within the month. But government doesn't ever go out of business. All they do is increase your taxes. And you, as a private citizen, are sitting there trying to figure out around the dining room table, how are we going to make ends meet? And the government is simply pouring more money into a system that is leaking it so badly through the fraud and through the abuse of, through the abuses that we're never able to have the program function correctly. The government at this point needs overhaul in a serious way. I think then, in addition to growing the economy, in addition to creating certainty in regulations and in taxation, one of the great responsibilities this Congress has in oversight. In that oversight capacity, I suspect that we need to deal with these leakages out of the system that are being taxed away from hardworking families struggling to make ends meet, and maybe just going down a bit on their taxes where they're not trying to sink underwater themselves. But one of the regulatory things that we should do is take a look at the way our banking regulators are operating. Now, what our local banks are being told is, by the regulators that come from here in Washington, D.C., is that if you make one bad loan, we're going to come take your bank away from you. What that has done is frozen our banks completely in their tracks. They're afraid to lend because that might just be the loan that goes bad on them, and then they lose their entire bank. We've seen examples like that across the country. And so our regulators right now, again, creating great uncertainty among banks who would be giving the loans that would keep small businesses going, but instead they're afraid, they're uncertain, they don't make loans, small businesses have the capital that they need to keep operating, choked off by a regulatory framework that is wrong. These are the things that I think compel us in this Congress to do the right thing. Americans are not expecting magic. They're not expecting just for us to do the unimaginable. Just start choking off the abuses, choke off the fraud, create a little certainty in the economy so that people can begin to hire, so that our economy will begin to grow. And as it grows, Medicare begins to work better again. Social Security begins to work better if we grow the economy. Local and state budgets begin to work better if we grow the economy, and our national budget begins to work better. If we choose as a Congress, and there will be many choosing here to obstruct that because they feel it is somehow wrong to give tax cuts, if they choose to obstruct it, I think we have deep economic troubles lying ahead. So for me, it's an easy question. If we don't grow, you have great troubles lying ahead, then let's grow. Let's pull out the stops. Let's find those balance points in regulation. Let's find the taxes where we can lower them to create more certainty and more job growth. Let's begin to pull those manufacturing jobs back from around the country, or around the world that have disappeared. We've driven them out through our overregulation and overtaxation. And I think when we do that, we will begin to see that this economy will grow and the world economy will grow along with us. If we choose not to do it, I think that we have those troubled waters ahead with higher unemployment, higher taxes, greater dislocation in our budgets nationally. I think then that we're going to see more printing of money. As they print money, then we find that the money in your savings accounts begins to dissipate. We've seen almost $2.6 trillion printed in the last year and a half or two by Mr. Bernanke. I think that Americans are alarmed at the prospect of hyperinflation. So, Mr. Speaker, as I conclude tonight, I would just like for this body to really contemplate the risks on the one side that we face, but the potential for optimism on the others. I believe that prosperity is possible, but I believe prosperity is a choice. It's going to be a choice on the part of this body as we move forward through the next months. So our friends on the other side of the aisle will complain about our consideration of health care, and yet all we're trying to do is create tax certainty and regulatory certainty. All we're trying to do is reverse a government takeover of part of the economy in order to create jobs. To me, it makes sense, and I understand the arguments from the other side and appreciate that they come with a different point of view. But I think Americans are looking for us to set aside the partisan differences that we have and to work as Americans. We run as Republican, Independent, or Democrat. That's accepted in the American political spectrum. But what's not expected is that we come here and operate with those same partisan viewpoints. So let's set aside the partisanship now at this point. Let's begin to work as Americans to do the right thing, grow the economy, create jobs, give the younger generations a sense that they have a place in the future, that the things they are working for will actually materialize, that there is a ray of hope. For myself, I have an absolute belief that our economy in the future is going to be better and that there are great days ahead. Winston Churchill's quote gave me that belief. He says, "You Americans always do the right thing." After you've tried everything else, he says. We've been in the process of the last 50 years of trying everything else. Now it's time for us to get serious and do the hard work of getting the government in control, shrinking the spending, lowering taxes, creating regulatory certainty so that this free market can continue to grow and expand through the next generations. Mr. Speaker, with that, I yield back the balance of my time, and I thank you.
Thank you. Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 5th, 2011, the Chair recognizes the gentleman from Vermont, Mr. Welch, for 30 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Welcome. I want to also thank the gentleman from New Mexico and welcome him back. In your comments about trying to work together and bipartisanship, that all makes an awful lot of sense to me, and I hope to all of us. But welcome back, sir. We're going to have an opportunity, Mr. Speaker, to use this special order, half hour, to talk about health care and also about the deficit. You know, we do want to be bipartisan, but we also want to be real. Our job is, as you know, to legislate. And we will be judged by our actions, by our deeds, more than by our rhetoric. And let me just say that the aspirations that have been enunciated by many of our Republican leaders are ones I quite admire: an open and transparent Congress, more open rules, fiscal discipline, things that are absolutely fundamentally important to this country. And the question now is whether there's going to be a follow-through on those stated goals. And the best way to start looking at it is what's going on with the health care bill. And the decision of the leadership is to repeal health care. Now, that's a very radical decision, because as much as there are legitimate issues, many legitimate issues about that health care bill, a wholesale repeal as a policy is going to do real damage to real families in this country, in every district in this country. And it is also going to immediately increase the deficit by $230 billion. And as is known, that is not the opinion of a Democrat or Republican. That is the conclusion of the impartial arbiter, the Congressional Budget Office. So if we are dedicated to fiscal discipline, we've got to bring down spending. How can we have as our first act as a Congress passing a bill that the Congressional Budget Office says will increase the deficit by $230 billion? It doesn't add up, obviously. But I'm going to pause here because I have some of my colleagues who are going to be called to other locations. And I want to start, if we could, with the gentlelady, or with the gentleman from Colorado, and I'll yield such time as he may consume to Mr. Perlmutter from Colorado. Thank you.
Well, I thank my friend from Vermont, and I want to piggyback on something that you just said. I hope that we can and we will work with the Republican majority on a lot of issues to get people back to work in America, to stop outsourcing jobs to other countries, to stop importing oil at tremendous price to this country so that money continues to flow away from the U.S. instead of into the U.S. I want to work with them on those kinds of things. But what I am concerned about is something you just mentioned, that the ideology and the radical approach that they're taking to repeal something that was put into place over the last 2 years but has been needed by this country for decades is something that I will fight. You know, ideological, radical, extreme positions are not what the American people want. They want practical, solid solutions where people are treated fairly and equally. And in the health legislation, the Affordable Health Care Act that we passed, the guts of that legislation is about treating people equally. And what I mean by that is we stop discriminating against people with pre-existing conditions. They are now free from that kind of discrimination, and that is so important under both. You know, we talked a lot today about the Constitution. Well, prior to the Constitution, we had the Declaration of Independence. And the Declaration of Independence, as you know, starts off, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. Probably should have added women at that point, but back then it was all men were created equal. That is carried forward in the 14th Amendment to the Constitution. And I have prepared kind of a chart of this, of the language. Which says, nor deny to any person within its jurisdiction, no state shall deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws. People with prior illnesses, with physical conditions, have been discriminated against because of those conditions and illnesses. That's wrong, it's immoral, and in my opinion, it's unconstitutional. And in my district, I was standing at a gas station, a guy comes up to me and he says, you all have to pass that legislation. My daughter has Crohn's disease. I'm in a roofing company. I want to start my own roofing company. But because she has this disease, I have to stay here. Otherwise, she'll be uninsurable because of her prior condition. Right. And I'm stuck in that job. Well, this bill, the heart of this bill, is to give freedom from that kind of discrimination against her prior illness, freedom to that roofer so he can go start his business. That's at the heart of the American way. And in my own situation, I have a daughter with epilepsy. She didn't ask to have epilepsy. That's just part of her makeup. But because of the epilepsy, she is uninsurable. unless she's part of some big group policy. And so, in the Affordable Health Care Act, we've done away with that kind of discrimination. We've freed people from that kind of discrimination, and the Republican majority, ideologically, radically driven, wants to take that freedom away, and I will fight that today, tomorrow, and next week.
Thank you.
With that, I yield back to my friend from Vermont.
All right, and I welcome the gentlelady from Maryland, Congresswoman Edwards.
I thank the gentleman. I'm so pleased to be here again. I've been here in the House on this floor for the last hour and a half because I feel passionately, as we all do, about health care. There's not one among us, either personally, as the gentleman from Colorado has expressed, or one of our constituents who doesn't have a health care story to share. And so I thought that I would actually share with you a story today, Mr. Speaker, from a constituent of mine who lives in the 4th Congressional District in Maryland. And she writes to me that her daughter was graduated from college in 2008 and lost coverage under this is from her, my health insurance. She got a job in August 2008 that provided her with health insurance coverage. When she lost that job in June 2009, as millions of Americans have lost their jobs, she was eligible for COBRA, the continuation of her health care. But, Mr. Speaker, she writes that the COBRA subsidy made it possible for her to continue with that insurance. But then when that subsidy ended in September 2010, they had to make a family decision, she says, to continue to pay for her COBRA coverage until the end of 2010 when it expired. It was an affordability question. She continues on, we knew she would become eligible for her insurance, for my insurance, at the start of the plan year in January 2011. And why is that? Because under the Affordable Care Act, she would be able to cover her daughter for her health insurance and would no longer have to COBRA that care. She continues on, the unsubsidized COBRA premium was over $400 a month, actually closer to $500 a month. And it's going to cost me only $60 to $70 to add my daughter, now 24, to my employer plan. And some of her doctors who were not in the network under her COBRA plan are in network for my plan, meaning that we will not have to pay for their full cost of out-of-pocket cost. Vicki, I won't say her last name, says to me, I'm in the sandwich generation and help with the care of my stepmother who lives in Florida. She falls into the Part D prescription drug donut hole every year. So now on January 1st, her costs will be reduced because of the health reform legislation as well. Mr. Speaker, what I'm saying to you and what we say to the American people today is that this isn't about numbers and statistics. It's about real people like Vicki and her daughter and her mother, her stepmother that she cares for. It's about real people who in their lives work every single day or are trying to find work and they don't have health care coverage. We cannot repeal the Affordable Care Act because that would be like throwing ice water on the American people. And with that, I yield.
Thank you very much. I want to talk about this question of